Welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast, where you're talking big questions, bold ideas, and better living with inspiring Atlantans. Today's guest is a great example of an inspiring Atlantan, Soumaya Khalifa. She is the founder and executive director of the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Atlanta, ISB, which is one of the most distinguished community building organizations in the area. The ISB connects American Muslim communities with a wide range of civic and faith-based groups, bringing Muslim voices to places where they have not been before. The ISB sends trained speakers to places like civic groups, churches, synagogues, law enforcement agencies, and schools, providing opportunities to learn about Muslims and Islam objectively through dialogue, outreach programs, presentations, and panels. She's an icon of intercultural communications, and in 2023 was recognized as one of the 500 most influential Georgians by Georgia Trend magazine. I perceive her to be a champion for peace, and I'm very grateful to have gotten to spend time learning from her during this podcast. So without further ado, please enjoy the episode with Soumaya Khalifa. Soumaya, thank you very much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate you prioritizing this.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Islamic Speakers Bureau, the work that you all do, how it's changed over the years, and kind of what you saw as that mandate when you started, and then how does that similar and different compared to how you see the mandate now?
What a great question. So the ISB, as we like to call it, is an organization. It's a nonprofit organization that was started right here in Metro Atlanta. And it started because I saw a definite need in the community for the wider community to understand who their Muslim neighbors are, who their Muslim co-workers are. And there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation about who the Muslims are. People tend to have a certain stereotype. They look a certain way, they walk a certain way, they talk a certain way, but there's so much diversity within Muslims that people don't even realize that they're not a monolith. And so back in 1998, 99, I saw a prototype of an organization out of the West Coast that educated the wider community about who their Muslim neighbors are. And I really, really liked that. I thought that was so phenomenal. And it was through a national convention that's usually held in Chicago. And my husband and kids used to drive up to Chicago and drive back down. And so year one, when I saw this, I was telling my husband, gosh, that would be so awesome if we had something similar to what the West Coast had in Atlanta. And I would talk about it, how amazing it is. I was holding a full-time job in corporate America. I had 3 children, a husband. I lived about an hour away from work. I commuted. And so, life got in the way. Sure. And year 2, we went again to Chicago, drove, came back, same conversation. And my husband said, listen, if you are going to just talk about it, let's just not do that. But if you're going to do something about it, I'm all in. And so at that time, I took that as a challenge. So it wasn't only something that I wanted to do. I was put in a place where I had to put, my money where my mouth was. And so there were a group of people who wanted to do something. So I went to them and proposed having a speakers bureau, and they loved it. Some didn't. And but we moved forward. We had our first training, because people don't just get out and speak. They have to be trained on how to do that within the First Amendment guidelines, where we teach and don't preach.
Sure. How'd you decide on the name?
It was part of the national organization. That's how they, their affiliates were called.
Got it.
I mean, we had an option to be named something else. And I really appreciate that question as well, because right now we have grown beyond being just a speakers bureau. So the name really does not fit us. And so we're going through a branding process right now, and we're going to be called ISB Atlanta. So no longer speakers bureau, even though that was our beginning. So we had our first training, and it was the Southern Polytech Institute, which no longer is there. It's really Kennesaw State University. And we had about 80, 90 people who were there. And one of the things, we brought people from California to train us. And one of the things that we talked about, this is not about going out and converting people into being Muslims. It's about information. It's about connecting with our neighbors. It's about building bridges. And the second thing that was, put out there as direct as we possibly can be, this organization is run by a woman, and that woman is me. So if anybody has any issues with that, this is not a place for you. Don't waste your time and energy. So those two things were, from the very get-go of our organization, were very clear to anybody who wanted to join our organization.
Yeah.
9/11. So that training was August 18th, 2001.
Okay.
Let me say that again.
Yeah.
August 18th, 2001.
Sure.
We had our website. Word got out that there's a Speakers Bureau. 9/11 happened. So we had no idea what took place. And with the board, we had back and forth. What do we do? Do we hold off until we find out what happened and proceed accordingly? Or do we just go as if nothing happened?
At that point, did you all have funding? Like, was the organization secure? Or is this an immediate existential question of, did you get to survive?
What is funding? Well, to this point, I will tell you what is funding, even though I know that it's really important and we work on it. But I think the organization had its start from what's needed and let's do it and let's worry about money later. One of the first people who donated to the organization were my parents because they believed in what I was doing, and family and friends. And so we had a little bit of money that we could, hold a training. We got the place pro bono from Southern Polytechnic Institute. So we kind of did what we needed to do, and we got to where we needed to go. And so I know when we first got a request for a speaker, and we said, gosh, how are we going to move forward? Right? These people were trained, et cetera. And we had no option but to move forward. So the speakers went out. It was kind of nervous, but really people had a very authentic need to connect with their Muslim neighbors and understand who they are.
Yeah.
It wasn't, come on, let's get you in and let's sabotage you. That was not the case in 99% of the situations where we were invited to speak. So we don't show up until now, knock on the door, say, hey, we're speakers and let's talk. No, we receive requests. We identify what the needs are. We have, the needs are, and we basically do a needs assessment. What does the organization need, and who's the best speaker that's available to go out there?
What is the organization that you're going to be serving by presenting? Yeah, what is their actual need and mandate?
So if it's senior citizens, for instance, then we want to, what are the questions? What have they been reading? What have they been exposed to? And we really drill down with our host to find out who are we talking to, and what are their needs. And basically, we are ready to present to them.
What would you say, like the ideal customer profile, to use a business term, or like what's the sweet spot where you get a call to go to this group and you're like, oh, we can really accomplish our goals with this audience. We've seen it, we've done it. Like, this is what we do best.
There are many sweet spots, not just one. We have different clientele, if you will. So there are schools where they're teaching about Islam and Muslims, and we go in and augment what they're already learning. There are teachers and educators who want to know more about their Muslim students and their family and understand how to work with them more effectively. There are law enforcement people who interact with the Muslim population. And instead of not knowing who they are and what are some of the things to watch out for and some of the things to keep in mind as they're interacting with them, of course, in a non-emergency situation. There are healthcare providers who take care of Muslim patients. There are, within the hospital framework, a very large percentage of healthcare providers are actually Muslims. So what do we do to retain and recruit the best there is in the medical field? And sometimes that is a challenge. So they need to be really open to that diversity, and how do they cater to them? So all those, we also have different like Rotary clubs and others, people who are in the senior living who have read books, women's groups. So really the sweet spot is really wide open in terms of who needs what we offer. And speaking is only one part of the ISB. You asked me earlier about how has the organization grown. We started out just being a speakers bureau, and that was a big job in itself. But we also, as we went along and as we matured, there were other opportunities. For instance, one of the things that we identified is that the Muslim narrative is not out there. A lot of times when we hear about Muslims, they're terrorists or their women are oppressed. We don't hear about the positive stories. We don't hear that some of our politicians are Muslims, some of our CEOs are Muslims, some, again, medical providers are Muslims, our teachers, our lawyers. So there are so many different narratives that are not in mainstream media that we don't hear about. So we created the Influential Georgia Muslim recognition program. We created the 40 under 40 recognition program. We created the 20 under 20, just to have different narratives that are out there that replace the two narratives that are out in the media about Muslims that are either terrorist or their women are oppressed. So we created the recognition programs. We were involved and still are involved in community service, especially around hunger. Shortly after we started, we partnered with other faith communities in Fayette County to provide summer lunch program to the underserved children of Fayette County. And so the Muslim community took on, through the leadership of the ISB, 1 day a week where we raised money, bought food, prepared lunches, and packed the lunches and delivered the lunches to the children throughout Fayette County. We partnered with the Atlanta Community Food Bank to have a presence of the Muslim community at their hunger walk every year, and we've been doing that for many years. So bringing the Muslim population, the Muslim community, to be part of the mainstream conversation. Going down the road, we identified a need for creating a leadership development program for the Muslim community. It's not exclusively for Muslims. It's open for anybody who's interested. But how do we really strengthen our leaders? Not just by trial and error, but give them content. So we created a 9-month program that is called ISB Leadership Institute. And we're doing our 5th year right now. And we have 50 people who have graduated from it. And they go through different modules, personal leadership, leading inclusively, and so on. And they also work on a nonprofit project to help a nonprofit get something done that otherwise they would not have done. So this year, for example, they're working with a school to create a library for the students. And and that's, again, we're on our 5th year, and it's been a phenomenal experience for us.
That's awesome to hear about all the different things happening. 23 years in, almost exactly 23 years since that first training. How would you characterize the need for what you all do now relative to 2001 when you're getting started?
The need is still there. The need is there. When there is an increase of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate, some people call that Islamophobia. We are getting requests from many different schools and other entities wanting to know about anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate, and how do we counter that? What do we need to know? What do we need to do? Very much aligned with the hate for Jews, with anti-Semitism. So those are two sides of one coin. And so we, as an organization, we are evolving with what the needs are out in the community, whether it is within the Muslim community or outside the Muslim community. We also work as a convener of the community. That's how we were described by one of our advisory council members, because when people come to our events, when they come to our galas, they see people from all walks of life. It's not just Muslims. It's people from the Jewish community, from the Christian community, from all communities, business community, nonprofit, government. Everybody is coming together. We also, in raising the profile of Muslims in Metro Atlanta, we have been holding a event in City Hall, Atlanta City Hall, for the last 8-9 years. It started out being a Ramadan iftar that's hosted by the mayor of Atlanta, where Muslim leaders and city leaders come together, along with our interfaith partners and leaders from across, again, many different sectors, will come together and learn about what is Ramadan, what is a Ramadan iftar. And it's hosted by the mayor of Atlanta. Of course, we got a little bit of a break with COVID, but we came back.
Sure.
And this past year, we moved from a mayor's iftar to a mayor's Eid event. And City Hall had over 400 people, including many, many city employees who are either Muslims or are curious to learn more. And it was an absolutely amazing event.
Thanks for sharing. How do you think about, and this could be qualitative, quantitative, some combination, like how do you think about success? And then when you look back so far, what would you point to as like some of the biggest wins among some of the many different things that you just shared with us?
So that question we wrestle with a lot. One of the things that we measure are some evaluations. So after a speaker goes out, we evaluate how did they perform? What can they do better? What can we do better? So the stories are, I have several. One of them is one of our speakers and people who were there to start the organization is actually a professor of political science at Georgia State University. And he was teaching, and this one student, he was teaching something about the Muslim world, etc. And this one student knew so much about the Muslim world, about Muslim practices and demographics and all that. And he said, gosh, this is so unusual. And so after class, he went up to him and he said, you really impressed me. How did you know so much about this topic while most people don't have that much knowledge? And he said, when I was in high school, we had a speaker come from the ISB and really intrigued me. And there's so much information that they shared, and it was of great interest to me. So anecdotes like that are what really resonates with us. People who are, healthcare providers. We had a Muslim family and we knew what to do. We knew what accommodations to have for them. And they really appreciated that. A lot of times we do trainings for the pastoral care of hospitals. It's hospitals wanting to have Ramadan iftars for their employees who are Muslims. So all those things I believe, are the impact of the ISB. I've had people say lots of the organizations, Muslim organizations that are in Atlanta right now were impacted by the ISB in terms of the professionalism that the ISB carries, and we took that on. It's about doing interfaith work that the ISB, we learned from the ISB, and we are continuing that in our own organization. Yeah. Many of the leaders in several Muslim organizations, Muslim-led organizations right now, went through the ISB. So we take great pride in that, that we are we inspire people and we inspire others to be the best that they can be.
Yeah. What is it about this work that called to you both, 1998 when you're driving home from that convention with your husband, and kind of seems to have been such a vocational calling for you? What is it about that brought you here and keeps you here?
I want a better world. I want my kids and my grandkids to feel like they belong. And if I do not do that work, who else will? I feel like at times say, oh my gosh, this is too much work. What's the return on the investment? And then something happens that reminds me that this is really a gift that was given to me from God, and I need to, He has given me the skills and talents to do what I'm doing, and to say, gosh, I'm not going to do that anymore. I mean, that day will come, but right now it's, I feel it's an obligation. Yeah.
What have been the impacts on you and your family of you walking this life of being an interfaith leader and an intercultural, communicator? It's
both good and bad. my husband, we are empty nesters. My husband is completely supportive. He has retired about a year and a half ago. He says, well, my retirement is not complete until you retire, right? And then something comes up. I say, okay, I'm going to retire. And something comes up. And he says, no, you can't stop that work. No, continue doing it until you do this and this and this, right? And so walking away, really, even though there was an intent, but it hasn't materialized yet. And so before my kids left home, they felt like the ISB was their fourth sibling. Like they competed with the ISB. But it's really, it's a passion. It's a commitment. It's, that's what it is. It's a lot of passion. And people who do that kind of work, it's not a job.
Sure.
It's not a job. It needs to be in their DNA that they need to do this work. It's not, I'm going to wake up and at 8 o'clock, I'm going to do X, Y, Z or whatever. I was talking to my daughter-in-law who just joined our family not too long ago. And I was telling her about the work and she said, well, that's not really a 9 to 5 kind of job. I said, no, it's not. It's 24/7. If something needs to be done, it needs to be done. You know, going to church on Sunday or going to an event on Saturday night or whatever. It really pushes one to be totally outside of their comfort zone. You know, showing up at a major event where the movers and shakers in Atlanta are there. You know, now I'm at a point where I know many of them, but just walking in, you know, with a headscarf on, people looking at you like, who in the heck is that? Yeah. What is she doing here? Is you know, I feel it. I feel it. And I see it and I feel it. This is when I, you know, do my big smile and say, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
You know, and just kind of break that ice and they're wondering about me even more.
I have a question later that I'll now bring up, which was, what is it like to be you out and about in the public now and in a headscarf and on a scale of no one really notices, feels totally normal, never get a sideways glance, it just is what it is. And if that scale ranges from that to, fear for my safety when I'm out and about and feel completely othered, like, where are we on that scale? What is your lived experience like when you matriculate through Atlanta?
It's all over. It's all over. I think I might be naive, that I think that nothing's going to happen to me and kind of go in and do whatever I needed to do. It used to be a little bit harder. When I started the ISB, I hadn't started covering my hair except for a few years before. And so covering one's hair is really a major identity shift. First of all, I had no idea how to cover my hair. My scarf would fall and I had no, one time I was speaking to a club. It was an early morning meeting. And so I was, talking to them, having a presentation. And believe it or not, scarves have styles. So this here.
Yeah, can you start us at ground zero of the knowledge of this and why does one cover their hair?
Sure.
Not how did you approach that decision, like different ways to do it? I'm curious.
Sure. So this is a personal decision for a woman to do. And it's part of growth in the faith. And it's by choice. So I have my daughter and 2 daughters-in-law, and they don't cover their hair. And it's up to them whenever they're ready, or they might not be ever ready. My mom was a medical doctor, and she covered her hair later on in her life. And she always said, life is too short. You need to consider covering your hair. And I said, okay. Now I was the type of person that got their hair cut every 4 weeks. And if it's 4 weeks in one day, and that my hair was very important to me. And I was, okay, I'll do it. Yeah, it's just when the time is right. And at one point in my life, right before starting the ISB, not right before, it's a few years, maybe 5 years or so, I decided that I needed to take that leap of faith and to cover the hair.
What does it signify?
It just obedience to God. It's and by the way, the head covers is not only particular to Muslims. When you see Orthodox Jewish women, they cover their hair when we, times of Christmas and the Nativity, the Virgin Mary, may God be pleased with her, her hair is covered in the Hindu tradition. So it's not only to Muslims, it's in many other faith traditions. One of my Russian Jewish friends, when we first met, he says, "You remind me so much of my mom." And I said, "Why?" And he said, she covers her hair just like you do. I said, "Okay, thank you." So that's the reason, and it's not only particular to Muslims. So when I did do that, it was just very weird because I was not comfortable with who I was. And one has to be comfortable who they are before they could exude that confidence to people who are around them.
Yeah. And do you see it as something, if I can just keep going with a line of logic or line of inquiry, do you see it as something that is for God because it's pleasing to God that your hair is covered? Or is it for you because it brings you into right relationship with God, or both?
Both. It's both. But not all people do it for the same reason. Okay? Some women do it for political reasons. Some do it for economic reasons, that I can get my hair done every so often. It's better just to cover it. Some of it is peer pressure. Everybody around me is doing it, and I can't go outside without having my hair covered. So it's many reasons for different people. Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. I think I cut you off. You were telling a story about...
But it has to be a woman's own choice.
Sure.
Because if she does not do that out of her own choice, then she does not get rewarded by God for doing it.
Yeah. And in modern day Atlanta Muslim community, American Muslim community, does it feel like women have it in their prerogative to make that choice?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, when there is a rise in Islamophobia, anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate, people feel threatened. Women who cover their hair feel threatened. I know right after 9/11, after the Muslim ban, women who did not feel safe covering their hair, and actually they were asked by their family, "Do not cover your hair in public." Because, in Islam, there's something about the lesser of two evils. Is it more harmful for a woman to be attacked, to be called bad names, to be all those things, or not cover the hair? So several people that I know personally decided to not cover their hair because of that.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Got it. Thank you for educating me there. I was going to ask about interfaith relations in Atlanta, just kind of where we are. And if you could give a letter grade maybe to start with interfaith relations and how you perceive them to be in the city right now, what grade would you give us and why?
I've never been asked that question.
Probably means it's a good or a bad question.
Oh, it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. Atlanta has been known to have excellent interfaith relationships. People in the faith community who engage in interfaith work, because interfaith work is not for all people. It's, some people who don't believe in it will call it Christian light or Muslim light or whatever. But no, it's really deep conversations. It's about building trust. It's understanding what's the elephant in the room. It's agreeing to disagree. Because when you and I sit together and talk about what's very important to us, what motivates us, what drives us, what makes us who we are, that is a very personal conversation. Very personal conversation. And we agree to disagree. And so the interfaith community in Atlanta is actually very close-knit. We know each other, we work together, we collaborate. I was just at an event the other day, and I sat next to, or a lady was sitting at our table, and I had no idea who she was, right? We started talking, she knew what I did, and she says, "Hey, my church is doing this." I says, "Yes, it's on that day at that place." And she says, "Somebody's reached out to you?" "Yes." And I looked up the name and said, "That's who I'm talking to about that event." So this is somebody, a total stranger that I had no idea who she was. But once we made a connection and started talking, I had been in touch, or their church has been in touch with me. So it's just very, very a very small, not small, but quite, knitted really closely, very, very close. How are we doing now? Unfortunately, because of world events, that has put a damper on the interfaith work because of world events. I believe that people who are outside of the interfaith work believe you have met, you have worked, we have invested in your organization to do all this work, and this happened, world event. How come your friends from this tradition and that tradition did not speak out and be on our side? And this is not what interfaith is. It's about knowing each other, humanizing each other, agreeing to disagree. We have different lived experiences, different narratives that we grow up with. And because we meet once a month or once a week and have lunch and talk and work together to make Atlanta better, does not mean that you're going to change me on how I see the world, or I'm going to change you on how you see the world. So this is what I discovered not too long ago.
What's working well specifically right now? And then what's a gap? And if you could wave your magic wand and close that gap, like what would fill it? What would get us to your vision of what perfect looks like?
What the beloved community is.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if I had a magic wand, I wish I did, would make the world and people of the world live in peace. That's what I wish for.
What about the ingredients that would lead to that recipe? What should we be doing as faith communities or the Atlanta community to lead to that maybe we aren't yet, that still creates that gap?
I don't think it's within the capability of Atlanta or the faith community, because that is a world problem. It's about countries. It's about justice. It's about valuing human lives all the same. And that is not within our capacity right here. I mean, the magic wand will be really a big magic wand to fix the world.
Sure.
But for us, is to continue conversations, whether that is publicly or not, and listen to each other. We're going to disagree, but we have to listen to each other and have that capacity to know that my narrative and your narrative are not the same.
You mentioned you need a big magic wand because a lot of the narrative and the relational arc is shaped by countries or big players. How do you stay steadfast when you're doing this work and giving it so much, and then something like October 7th can happen, or actors that are multinational are influencing so much of the narrative, and obviously there's so much that's outside of your locus of control? Like, what practice do you have, or what wellspring do you go to find the motivation and the continued effort to keep going and to control what you can?
I don't watch the news.
Ever?
I have a husband who's glued to the TV 24/7 watching news. And anything that you want to know, he's got it. So he gives me the abridged version of what happened in the day. I focus on news about the U.S., what happens here. I also look into my faith and go back to the gifts that I was given to be able to move forward. It's talking to friends of different faith traditions. It's, people who unsolicited tell me how much the work that I'm doing is needed. That keeps me going. Of course, my faith, and there isn't anything that I pray a lot. I ask for world peace. I ask God to protect all people. And it's really a really tough time to be living right now for all humanity. All humanity. And it's scary. It's very scary. But I don't let myself go that deep, because if I do, then I'm going to clamp up and say, okay, guys, this is not working. But I know it is. I know what we're doing works. It's not as maybe people want it in terms of producing the results they want now. But if we don't talk, if we don't connect, if we don't do all those things, the world is going to be a worse place.
Yeah, definitely doesn't get better without trying. I want to double click on the news sobriety point. I really like the term news sober, and I've had some people staunchly advocate for being news sober, saying that one of the things that we've all been fed is that this narrative that if you're going to be a good citizen, you got to watch the news. And like, that's just a narrative. What does your news consumption, like specifically, what does that look like in a given day and in a given week?
Well, let me start off by sharing a story. There is this Islamic scholar, and we met somewhere, and I asked him, what's going on? It's just really horrendous, and it's been many years ago. And he says, I'll tell you how you handle it, but you have to promise you're going to do it. And I said, no, I can't promise you I'm going to do it. I need to know what it is first. Anyways, he said to me, stop watching the news. And, that took me many years to kind of process and see his point of view. We are not totally news sober in my household, again, because my husband is a big news follower. But we are really, each and every one of us, we are a product of what we consume in terms of news. And we are usually stuck to one source of news. We don't have a variety of news sources that we consume. And that makes us, that shapes who we are, that shapes our mindset, that shapes our lenses through which we see the world and we see things. And that's really dangerous. That we think we're free and we control our own mind. But guess what? We really don't. We really don't. Yeah. And it's scary because somebody has more power over me than I have over myself.
Yeah, especially when their incentive is having you activated enough with some emotion that you keep watching. And obviously we know that emotion is fear a lot of the time.
That's absolutely right.
Shifting gears to thinking about some of the religious commonalities and differences. You mentioned, there are going to be differences, and no matter if we are breaking bread and getting to know one another, you're not going to change my point of view on things, and I'm not going to change your point of view on things. And in fact, that's not, the goal of interfaith relationships. I'm curious if you can define a little bit around where do you see as the major points of similarity and difference between an Islamic worldview and a Christian worldview. And someone in an early one of these discussions said to me, every language has a word for water, but they all mean the same thing. And just like many religions or languages have a word for God, they're all pointing in the same direction. And that's what this person believed. And part of that feels very good to me. Like that lands in a nice place where I'm like, man, we are very much more similar than the stories of separation and difference that we tell each other. And there's enough overlap that I think there is a universal truth that we're all pointed towards. And yet there's a fine line on that. And there are very different expressions and worldviews of a conception of God, of a way of living, a way of being. So I'm curious, and I know that's a big question, but if you could start to look at the points of similarity that you see, and then those important points of difference that are relevant to keep in mind when doing this interfaith work.
And between Christianity and Islam, right?
That's the context from which I was coming, but you can take that in any direction.
Sure.
If there's others you would want to work
there. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, a group of Muslim scholars and academicians wrote a letter to Christians. And the letter is called A Common Word. And the common word between Muslims and Christians is love God and love your neighbor. And so this is a huge commonality that we have, is loving God and loving your neighbor. And how do we do that? I was at a church a couple of weekends ago, and this woman came up and talked about giving. I think it's called tithe. Tithe. And she said, I was poor. And somebody came to me and said, you got to give, because when you give, you really won't be losing that money. God will replenish it multifold. And I was sitting next to the guy who invited me to the church, and I said, that is exactly in Islam. Like when a person gives, that money is not wasted. God will provide for them multitudes instead of that money. Believe it or not, I started my interfaith work when I was 4 or 5. I was in Egypt, and my family, because they were like a certain level of socioeconomic class, and the norm was that for them, for that class, to send their daughters to French schools and their sons to English schools. I don't know why. The practice still goes on until this day. But the French school that I went to was across the street from where we lived. And so the French school was actually run by nuns. And they were, fully dressed as nuns and were very strict. And we had a chapel at the school. We used to have Friday off and Sunday off, but we went to school on Saturday, right? And on Saturday, they had chapel service. And I loved it because there was singing, there was piano, and it was just so beautiful. And so I would go with the Christian girls to the chapel to see what's going on. And I would go home and tell my mom, I went to a Christian service today. My mom would say, well, you're a Muslim. You're not supposed to go there. And my mom reminded me that a long time ago that I told her that I go to the chapel to sing to God, and I came home to pray to God as a Muslim. So really my interfaith work started way, way young. So in terms of the similarities and differences, the love God and love your neighbor is key to both faith traditions. The example of the giving, the example of being kind, the example of being good stewards of the earth. All those things are so common between the two faith traditions. What's different, however, is how Muslims see God and how Christians see God. Muslims see God as the one and only, and he does not have children, and he was not born. He is God. And there's a chapter in the Quran that says that. Christianity looks at God as being Jesus Christ and also the Holy Trinity. So in Islam, Jesus Christ, may peace be upon him, is looked upon as a mighty prophet. Him and Prophet Muhammad and Moses, may peace be upon them. And so the concept of God and the Holy Trinity is different between the faith traditions. But how we need to be living our life, how we need to go about doing things, a lot of similarities.
Earlier, you mentioned Mary, and you said, may peace be upon her, I believe. Why'd you say that?
It's because Mary is considered to be a woman like no other woman. Muslims believe in the miracle conception of Jesus Christ and the virginity of Mary. May peace be upon her. So that is also common between Christianity, I believe, and Islam.
And I would speculate or contend that the similarities in worldview that you just articulated are greater import and substance in terms of what does that mean for how we should live our lives and how we should be in 2024 in Atlanta in August and September, than some of those differences that we will probably only find out with specificity after we pass.
Exactly. It's not up to us to say who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. We don't know. That's God's work. That's God's work.
Yeah.
And it's really transgressing on God's work. If somebody comes up and says, hey, this people believe a certain way, you know what? They're going to the hellfire. It's none of your business. That's not your work. That is transgressing on God's work. And that is a major sin. That's a major sin.
I perceive the cultural differences in our ways of living to be potentially even larger than the spiritual differences in belief. Do you think that's the natural state of things, or does it feel like the need for ISB to educate the masses, if you will, in a traditionally Judeo-Christian society? Are we off there? I want to ask that question a different way.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Let me think about what I'm trying to ask and then think about how to say it. It's basically like, it feels like we have a pretty different lived experience. Obviously, you are bridging into an interfaith work as your profession, but if not, our paths may never cross. I don't have too many conversations with folks in headscarves. And I know a few Muslim folks through some civic work that I do, but otherwise, like, that would be separate from my bubbled existence. But it seems like our faiths and beliefs aren't that different to suggest that we should have a completely different walk through the world. And so does it feel like these differences are artificial, or is that just kind of the natural byproduct of things? And so it's important that we understand one another, but that kind of degree of separate but going our own ways is understandable. Like, how do you think about the way things are, and does that feel right or off? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the assumption that we're a lot different. Christianity and Islam are just, or religion in general, are just part of what makes us who we are, right? So if you take, you're an American Christian, I'm an American Muslim. We go to the same grocery stores. Our kids go to the same schools. We both vote. We both are concerned about our communities and our homelessness and our whatever else is happening, our crime rate, our water quality, our climate change, all those things. It's really interesting. My brother-in-law was telling us about meeting an Egyptian Christian. And he said, he talking to them, and it's culturally the same. So he was a Christian raised in a Muslim culture. So culturally, there are a lot of similarities. Here, I am a Muslim in a Christian culture. So I operate just like you. I know the corporate game, right? I know what to do, not do. So I think the perceived differences are really not that, except when you go to church and when I go to a mosque to pray, or how do I interact with God and how you interact with God. And these are all very personal, very intimate relationships.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely.
And I think that's more, when people, with the population of Muslims, all right, American Muslims, about a third of them are African Americans. And these are folks who are descendants of those who were enslaved. And about a third of those who were enslaved were actually Muslims. And some of the African Americans are finding their roots and coming back to what their forefathers' faith tradition was. A third is Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. About 20% of Arab background, just like me. And then everybody else. So the diversity within the Muslim community is very diverse. But what I'm trying to say is, for those who, not African American, because the African American Muslim experience is very similar to the African American Christian experience. The immigrant background experience, maybe first generation is not the same as yours, but the second generation is. Exactly like yours.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is that it's the broader cultural context that actually dictates more about what your lived experience might be, of which the way that you pray and go to church is one small slice, less the specific religious orientation dictating the rest.
That's absolutely true. And the values that we carry, right?
Yeah.
Such as, for example, Muslims are not supposed to drink alcohol or pay interest or, have extramarital affairs or have, relationships before marriage. Do all of them do that? No. But that's what the religion teaches. So a person who is adhering to those values and those teachings might be different. But maybe a Christian who is very close to their faith tradition might be the same as the Muslim who's very close to their faith tradition. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And when I'm going to ask about AI and kind of the technology moment that we're in here in a minute. And when I started doing some of this blogging a year and change ago, I was originally writing under the premise, it was the title, Artificial Intelligence, Authentic Spirituality. And thinking that in this modern age where the world seems to be moving faster and faster, and we can have more competing interests competing for our attention, we're at risk of missing out on something deep and foundational and meaningful if we lose touch with our spirituality and the divine and a deeper sense of a higher purpose. And I think that is true for regardless of which religious tradition you practice.
Absolutely.
That we're all at risk of missing out on the fullness of life that's promised to us and made available as a gift.
Right.
If we are caught up in the algorithms or moving too fast on the capitalist hamster wheel. So that's kind of how I would articulate what I think you said, is that there's something there for all of us in the spiritual pursuit, even if the details tend to look a little bit different in a specific religious context.
You said it so much better than me. Thank you.
Thank you. On that segue, how do you see artificial intelligence impacting religious communities, interfaith work? Does it? What's your sense of this moment?
It's, let me give you an analogy of a knife. Is the knife good or bad? Right?
Mm-hmm. Depends on how you use it.
Exactly,
Sure.
Exactly. So, if we use the knife for what is, the good uses, then it's great. And if we use it, if a person uses it to kill others or to sabotage property or whatever, then it's not good. I think it's the same analogy with AI. It's how it's used.
What are you excited about and what are you worried about as it comes to AI and generally and in the interfaith and intercultural work?
I'm excited about the availability of information. And how fast a person could get that information. I am worried about the authenticity of the information. And really, right now we live in such a fast-moving world. It's scary. It's scary because we do not stop to think. That coupled with social media and how things can get out of hand, that really scares me.
Do you feel and do you have a perception if religious leaders are or are not incorporating artificial intelligence into their strategies?
I think some are. And that would be the more structured, the bigger, et cetera. In terms of the Muslim community itself, I think we're not there yet. but we will get there.
Yeah, I find myself very curious about if it will be a tool for promoting understanding, in theory.
Promoting understanding in my point of view, and it could be old-fashioned. It's not about reading something. It's about connecting with a person, with a human being. It's emotional. It's not, done by the brain, because there's a lot of information out there and some of it is pretty good. Mm. But if you and I are not in a room together, if we don't break bread together, I don't want us to be robots.
Sure. We
cannot build community on AI. It's us connecting. I think AI will help us, but it's not the be all end all. We need to connect as human beings. Because if we exchange information, if we communicate through other means than being human together, I don't think that's going to move hearts and change things.
Yeah.
It's about people calling each other. It's about showing empathy. It's about being there for your neighbor. It's asking, how can I help? Mm. It's not just information. Information is amazing and good, don't take me wrong, but that's not it. That could be maybe 20% of the equation. 80% is about relationships.
Yeah.
It's about trust. Because if I trust you, then I am going to listen to you more. I'm going to do things with you more.
Yeah. What would you say if someone's sitting at home listening to this and they're thinking, I don't know anyone who's Muslim, but I'm buying what she's saying around the need for human connection and knowing our neighbors. How would you encourage them to bridge that gap and divide? And maybe even a step further, if someone's saying, I'm realizing we talked about new sober earlier, I've been acculturated on a view of negative Muslim perception or Islamophobia in my life. And I'm struggling with those stereotypes. How would you encourage someone to get past that, get connected?
Sure. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Really appreciate you. Second is give us a call at the ISB, isbatlanta.org. Be happy to personally talk to you on the phone or meet for coffee or meet for lunch or whatever. And if you have a community or if you have a church or you have, whatever group of people, we'd be happy to come and connect with you and talk. And really, the Muslim population in Metro Atlanta now is about close to 200,000 people. And there are 80 different mosques around the city, the Metro Atlanta area. So I am sure that a Muslim is not too far away from our listeners. And again, if they don't, and all Muslims are not comfortable and ready to speak about their faith tradition. Growing up, I did not feel comfortable in my own skin. I did not feel comfortable that I was a Muslim, that I was Egyptian, that I was an American. And I tended to show people the side of me that I felt was the appropriate side to show until I completely accepted me for who I am. And this is when I made a decision to wear the headscarf. So people are at different stages in their journey. But one thing for sure is our speakers and myself are available to whoever's interested and to meet a Muslim or to talk to a Muslim or to have a presentation or whatever else.
Yeah. Thank you. I hope folks will take you up on that. And I'm also curious, we mentioned the AI moment, but then when you look ahead generally, what are you optimistic about in terms of leaving the world better for, you mentioned your kids and grandkids, and I'm hoping you can tell us about your family a little bit, and then also think about what it is that you're trying to pass down to them and the world that you want them to inherit and embody as they continue on their journey.
I think the younger generations are extremely smart. I see what my grandkids take in school. And I'm just saying, oh my God, I'm glad that I grew up when I grew up, not now. They're taking a lot of AP classes and this and that. I mean, they're just really super smart. I feel like the world is going to be in good hands. It's a responsibility for parents and communities to instill the values in our children and future generations. Because if they're just smart and don't have values, that's not a good combination. Yeah. But it's up to each and every parent, grandparent, community leader to help young people to see the values that are important and to carry them on forward. That's a legacy that I hope my husband and I leave with our kids and grandkids.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a few lightning round questions, if I may. Your favorite meal in Atlanta?
Ooh, I love food. I appreciate food, and I appreciate good food. Anything that's good, I love. I love all kinds of cuisines. When my husband wants to really treat me, we go to a Greek restaurant where I order a fish that's flown in from Greece. And I eat the fish like you won't believe it. I mean, I want the whole fish because I want to be able to taste the flavors, and I want to be able to dig in the head and take everything out. And, my husband takes pictures of me when I do that, so it's terrible. But that's my favorite spot. That's my favorite meal. It's in Buckhead.
Okay. Sounds awesome.
It's great. You don't want to go with me, though, because I get really messy.
That sounds okay. What do you think happens to us when we die?
Ooh, that is such a great question. According to the Islamic tradition, human beings, are only on earth for a limited time. And what they do during their lifetime on earth and what their intentions are recorded. And when they die, then it's called their book, where everything that they've done, their intentions, et cetera, is presented to God. And God will decide whether a person goes to heaven or goes to hell. So, and that is really, when you talk about a company's vision statement, be the number one, whatever. For a Muslim, their vision statement, again, Muslims are very diverse and not all of them are religious, just like any other faith tradition. Their vision statement is to end up in heaven. And so they need to have that vision. And what I'm doing right now, is this a step closer for me to go to heaven or go to hell? And so that's, their body's going to be in the graves for a while. And then when the end of life for all of us comes, then God will decide who goes to heaven and who goes to hell.
Thank you.
And intentions are very important. Let me give you an example. So if I see a banana peel on the ground, all right, it's dangerous, right? And I decide to move it, put it in the trash can or put it aside or whatever. Why am I doing that? Am I doing that to save somebody from slipping and falling and hurting themselves? Or am I doing that so you could see me do that and say, oh my gosh, Soumaya is such a good human being. So if I'm doing that to impress you, then that's not good. But if I'm doing that to clarify my intentions, then that is good.
Yeah, I feel that difference. We had a good conversation before we were recording about why do this podcast.
Yes.
And sure, there's some of both of those elements there. And I'm sure there's some of both of those elements in many of the decisions that we make. Do you have, I asked you that question and you articulated kind of the common Islamic view or the traditional Islamic view. Do you have any deviations on that? Or is that also what you believe?
That's what I believe.
Thank you. Do you have any favorite books or one that you would particularly recommend to folks listening to this?
Absolutely, I do. And the book that I recommend that we all need right now is called Belonging Without Othering.
Can you tell us about that book?
It's by John Powell and Stephen Menendian. That book talks about the polarization in our families, in our communities, in our world, whether they're polarization based on political views, whether on race, whether it's on religion, and how we as human beings put people in stereotypes and don't move them from there. And it provides ways for us to do a paradigm shift and be able to see people as who they are and look at the commonalities that we have and create space for them to belong in our families, in our communities, in our countries. And that is really the essence of what I do.
What's the context from the authors?
The context really, it's wide. It's about individual leaders, individuals, how they could do that paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So again, very, very highly recommended.
Got it. Thank you. And then last question, is there a habit or a practice you see many people embracing in modern society that you think doesn't serve us well? And what would you replace that habit with?
The habit that we have is that of polarization. We see people that don't look like us, that don't worship like us, that don't dress like us, that don't whatever like us, as they're not as good as. And whenever I do trainings for people who are different, is identify someone in the group who is different, who you perceive to be different than you. And I do one-on-one, and there's a blank sheet, and it's every 2 people get to do that and identify what's common between you two. And the couple that gets the more, that gets a prize.
What do you typically see when people go through that?
They see the humanity in each other. They see commonalities that were hidden because of their outside look. You know, if I talk to someone and I say I went to a Catholic school as a little kid, how many people looking at me would see that? How many people looking at me know that I spoke French and German and Spanish? You know, you don't know that. We have to have a conversation. Who would know that, you know, and I'm taking me for an example because I know me better than anyone else. You know, what do I like to eat? Like the question you asked. What are my worldviews? Why do I, you know, do the things that I do? What's driving me? People would not know that. I love to shop. And people who see me at a store would not uncover all that. They probably look at me and say, oh, okay, she probably does not speak English. Yeah. Or she's not from here, or she's un-American, or she's whatever stereotypes they might have.
Yeah.
But just having that conversation breaks all that down.
Yeah. And so is the suggestion to folks to actually have that one-on-one where you really try to get below the surface, get to know somebody and see what shared humanity you can find?
Yep.
Yeah.
Highly recommended. It's eye-opening.
I would love to offer, if you are so inclined, the opportunity for you to pray for anybody listening to this.
Oh, wow.
If you'd like to offer a prayer for anybody out there who is hearing this.
Yeah, thank you. I got to tell you a story before I do the prayer. I was in an interfaith board, and the president, and that was early on in my interfaith journey, and the president of the organization asked me to pray, and everybody was clergy around me before lunch. And for the Muslims, what they do before they pray, before eating, is they say, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. And so I said that, I said, I'm going to pray, and everybody put their heads down. I got done, and everybody's head was still down. And I did not know what to do. And I just came out and said, hey, guys, I'm done.
The intro was the prayer.
The prayer, that's it. That's it. I'm done. When, come on, let's get to eat. And so at that time, they started laughing, and they said, just say amen, and everybody know what to do. So, so my prayer for the world is, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. I pray for humanity, for our brothers and sisters all over the world who might be suffering. May God Almighty take away their suffering. May God bring justice and peace to the world. May He put peace in our hearts. May He put love in our hearts for each other. May He unite us to do what's good. God, we are asking you, please answer our prayers. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our show today. Thank you, Soumaya, very much for spending your time with us. A good lesson for all of us about the ways that we perceive people in our community, especially those who maybe look or sound different for us and have a great and different faith tradition, and how sometimes we maybe jump to conclusions or certain conceptions that aren't rooted in facts or a real understanding. And so I appreciate how she gently challenges me to look beyond my surface level assumptions and really get to know people, and to see the shared humanity that we have and recognize and appreciate the very real differences. So Soumaya, I appreciate you sharing that example with us. I appreciate you all journeying with Macon Atlanta. As always, I welcome input, feedback, ideas for future episodes. This is fun when it is a group project and something we share together. And so thank you all for your input and spending your time with me. Thank you.